October 14th, 1943. 23,000 feet above Nazi Germany. Second Lieutenant Robert Hughes grips the controls of his B-17 Flying Fortress as his formation approaches Schweinfurt. Through the plexiglass nose, he sees them, dozens of black specks growing larger by the second. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s racing toward them head-on at a combined closing speed of 600 miles per hour. The navigator beside him raises his single, handheld 50 caliber machine gun, the only forward defense they possess. It's like bringing a pistol to a howitzer fight. The German fighters open fire at 800 yards. 20-millimeter cannon shells rip through the thin aluminum nose. The navigator's gun falls silent. Glass shatters. Wind screams through the cabin. Hughes watches in horror as the lead bomber in his formation simply disintegrates, its nose blown clean off by a frontal attack. By day's end, 60 B-17s have been shot down. Another 17 are damaged beyond repair. Of the 291 bombers that left England that morning, over 26% never return intact. The mission earns its grim nickname, Black Thursday. Bomber Command suspends deep penetration raids entirely. The strategic bombing campaign, the centerpiece of Allied air power, teeters on the edge of collapse. What Hughes doesn't know as he limps his damaged bomber back to England is that a solution already exists. A modification so controversial that senior officers have called it adding weight to a dying horse. A twin-gun turret mounted beneath the bomber's nose, designed by engineers working on a failed escort gunship project. The modification will add 1,200 pounds to an already overloaded aircraft. Test pilots warn it will reduce climb rate, decrease maneuverability, and make the bombers sitting ducks. But Air Force Chief Henry Hap Arnold faces an impossible choice. Continue losing bombers at unsustainable rates, or gamble everything on a modification that could make his aircraft even more vulnerable. The Germans have discovered the B-17's Achilles heel, and unless something changes, the Flying Fortress, America's symbol of aerial might, will become its coffin. This is the story of the Bendix chin turret, a modification born from failure, opposed by experts, and dismissed as suicidal. A modification that would save over 300 bomber crews and change the course of the air war over Europe. This is the story of the most important 4 square feet of aluminum ever bolted to an American bomber. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress entered service in 1938 with a revolutionary promise, a bomber so heavily armed it could defend itself without fighter escort. By 1943, that promise has become a death sentence. The B-17F model bristles with 13 50 caliber machine guns covering every angle, except forward. Through the glazed nose, bombardiers and navigators peer through yards of plexiglass with only handheld weapons, single flexible gun mount. No armor, no turret. For months, this vulnerability remains theoretical. German fighter pilots attack from the rear and sides, where the Flying Fortress's defensive firepower concentrates. Tail gunners, waist gunners, and ball turret operators pour thousands of rounds into attacking fighters. The tactic works, barely. Bomber losses hover around 5% per mission. Acceptable, commanders insist, though crews know differently. With a required 25 mission tour, a 5% loss rate means only 1 in 4 airmen completes their service. Then, in November 1942, Luftwaffe ace Oberleutnant Egon Mayer changes everything. While studying crashed B-17 wreckage near his base in France, Mayer notices the nose construction. Thin aluminum skin, minimal structural support, and those enormous plexiglass panels. He calculates the approach angles and realizes the mathematical truth. A head-on attack presents German fighters to bomber gunners for mere seconds. The combined closing speed, a FW-190 at 400 miles per hour meeting a B-17 at 200, gives gunners less than 3 seconds to acquire, aim, and fire. Meanwhile, the German pilot can begin firing at 800 yards and hold the trigger through impact distance. On November 23, 1942, Mayer leads his squadron in the first coordinated frontal assault against B-17s attacking Saint-Nazaire. The results shock both sides. Mayer personally shoots down 3 bombers on head-on passes, watching their noses shatter under 20mm cannon fire. Other German pilots quickly adopt the tactic. Within weeks, Luftwaffe Chief Adolf Galland circulates new tactical regulations to every fighter unit. The attack from the front high or front low, all with low speed, is the most effective of all. American bomber crews start calling it 12 o'clock high, the bearing of death approaching from directly ahead. Loss rates spike. The August 17, 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission costs 60 B-17s, many to frontal attacks. Crews return with horrifying reports. Pilots decapitated at their controls. Bombardiers simply gone, sucked through shattered nose sections. Navigators found frozen at their stations, still clutching useless handheld guns. The Army Air Force tries everything. They add cheat guns, single 50 calibers poking through the fuselage sides. Crews jury-rig additional guns in the nose, wedging them into cramped spaces never designed for weapons. Some bombardiers fly missions crouched behind ammunition cans stacked as improvised armor. Nothing works. The math remains ruthless. A handheld gun, even in skilled hands, cannot track and engage a fighter approaching at 600 combined miles per hour. Engineers propose powered turrets, but the solutions seem worse than the problem. A nose turret would obstruct the bombardier's view, defeating the precision bombing mission. Weight becomes the crushing concern. Every pound of guns. And ammunition means less bomb capacity, shorter range, degraded performance. Senior officers reject proposal after proposal. The B-17F, they insist, is already at its design limits. By October 1943, the crisis reaches breaking point. Black Thursday proves German fighters have solved the B-17 problem. Bomber Command suspends deep raids into Germany. Without long-range fighter escorts, still months away from deployment, the strategic bombing campaign faces cancellation. President Roosevelt's promise to strike the Nazi war machine from the air hangs by a thread. The Flying Fortress needs forward firepower, but every solution proposed seems to promise suicide rather than salvation. The solution emerges not from Air Force headquarters or Boeing's engineering department, but from a failing experiment 3,000 miles away in Burbank, California. At Lockheed's Vega subsidiary plant, a team of engineers huddles around an unusual aircraft. It's a B-17F, but modified beyond recognition. Extra guns protrude from every surface. An additional top turret crowds the fuselage. Most striking, a twin-gun turret mounted beneath the nose, exactly where bombardiers need to aim their bomb sights. The aircraft represents the YB-40 project, an attempt to convert B-17s into flying gunships that escort standard bombers. The concept sounds brilliant on paper. A B-17 stripped of bombs and loaded with ammunition and extra guns, flying alongside regular bombers to provide defensive firepower. Vega Aircraft, Lockheed's subsidiary, receives the modification contract in September 1942. By November, the prototype flies. But nobody involved possesses traditional bomber design credentials. Vega specializes in civilian aircraft and has never designed combat systems. The engineers adapting the turret, a Bendix Corporation design originally intended for other applications, work without combat data, without bomber tactics experience, without the institutional knowledge Boeing accumulated over years of B-17 development. Senior Air Force officers view the project with skepticism bordering on contempt. In May 1943, 12 YB-40s deploy to England for combat testing. The results proved disastrous. Loaded with 14 to 16 guns and 11,000 rounds of ammunition, the YB-40s gain 4,500 pounds over standard B-17s. Climb rate drops by half. The gunships struggle to keep formation. After standard bombers drop their weapons and accelerate for home, the sluggish YB-40s fall behind, becoming targets themselves. By August, the project shuts down. Of 59 sorties flown, the heavily armed escorts claim only 5 confirmed kills. 1 YB-40 is lost. The failure seems complete. Air Force planners write off the program as wasteful experimentation. The surviving YB-40s return to America for scrapping. Vega engineers face criticism for wasting resources on an unworkable concept. The project disappears into classified file cabinets, another dead. End in the search for bomber survivability. But in late August 1943, amid the recriminations and paperwork, a Douglas aircraft engineer at their Tulsa Modification Center examines the final YB-40 production drawings. He notices something others missed. While the YB-40 failed as a concept, one component performed flawlessly: the Bendix chin turret. In combat reports, bombardiers operating the remotely controlled twin 50 caliber turret engaged head-on attackers successfully. The turret provided stable firing platform, clear field of fire, and crucially, required no manual aiming during high-speed approaches. The bombardier simply placed his aiming reticle on the target. The turret tracked smoothly, powered motors absorbing recoil. Without approval, without authorization, without consulting Boeing or Air Force headquarters, Douglas engineers make a decision. The last 86 B-17Fs rolling off their production line, designated Block 70 through Block 75, will receive chin turrets. Not as part of a gunship, not as an experiment, as standard equipment on regular bombers. They gamble their careers on a modification everyone else has rejected. The bet makes sense. Install just the turret, not the YB-40's dozen other guns. Add 1,200 pounds instead of 4,500. Give bombardiers forward firepower without crippling aircraft performance. What they don't know is they've just launched the most important unauthorized modification in American aviation history. September 1943. Douglas Aircraft's modification facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma operates at wartime intensity. B-17Fs arrive from Boeing's Seattle plant as empty airframes. Douglas installs radios, armor plating, survival equipment, and delivers combat-ready bombers. It's here, amid the organized chaos of round-the-clock production, that engineers quietly install the first chin turrets on standard bombers. The modification requires extensive airframe changes. The bombardier station, previously an open workspace with plexiglass panels and a bomb-aiming device, must accommodate a powered turret control system. Engineers cut mounting points into the fuselage structure, reinforcing load-bearing members to handle turret weight and firing stress. Hydraulic lines snake through cramped spaces. Electrical connections multiply. The Bendix turret itself, a compact assembly housing twin 50 caliber machine guns with 300 rounds per gun, bolts to a motorized gimbal assembly beneath the nose. The control mechanism represents genuine innovation. The bombardier operates the turret through a small hand controller, moving twin grips that send electrical signals to servo motors. The turret responds instantly, traversing horizontally and elevating vertically to track targets. A computing gun sight overlays range data on the bombardier's view, but in the chaos of head-on combat, most bombardiers simply point and shoot. The system proves remarkably intuitive, far easier than wrestling handheld weapons in slipstreams approaching 200 miles per hour. But the modification faces immediate skepticism. When test pilot Major Carl Spaatz climbs into the first modified bomber, he catalogs concerns immediately. The turret adds 1,200 pounds forward of the center of gravity, making the nose heavier. Engineers compensate by adjusting tail ballast, but flight characteristics change. The aircraft requires more back pressure on takeoff. Control response differs subtly. Worst of all, the additional guns increase overall weight, reducing already marginal ceiling and climb performance. Spots files a cautious report. The modification improves forward firepower significantly, but performance penalties concern him. At maximum combat weight, the modified bombers reach 25,000 feet, their operational ceiling 5 minutes slower than unmodified aircraft. 5 minutes represents vulnerability, exposure, fuel consumption. In combat, minutes mean life or death. Word reaches Boeing's Seattle headquarters in October. Engineers there react with barely concealed fury. Douglas has modified Boeing's design without authorization. The chin turret, Boeing designers argue, compromises the B-17's carefully balanced aerodynamics. The plexiglass nose, designed for maximum visibility for precision bombing, now includes a protruding turret that disrupts airflow. Ice accumulates differently. Crews report the turret guns, when fired at maximum elevation, crack plexiglass panels from muzzle blast. Douglas engineers quickly design blast deflectors, but the fixes feel improvised, rushed. By November 1943, 86 modified B-17 NEFs have been delivered to England. Combat groups receive them with confusion. No official documentation exists. Crews haven't trained on the new turrets. Bombardiers discover the systems through trial and error. The modified bombers fly without official designation. They're simply B-17Fs with an unusual bulge under the nose. Maintenance crews scrounge turret parts from various sources, documenting nothing, creating a logistical nightmare. The Army Air Force faces a decision: officially adopt the unauthorized modification or order the turrets removed and demand Douglas cease installation. The question reaches Washington just as Black Thursday losses arrive. Suddenly, the unauthorized modification looks less like insubordination and more like salvation. November 1943, the Pentagon's third floor, Air Force Headquarters. Lieutenant General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force in England, cables Washington with an urgent request. The modified B-17Fs, arriving with chin turrets, he reports, show promise in initial combat operations. Bombardiers report confidence in engaging frontal attackers. Crews request more turret-equipped aircraft. Eaker's message contains a single recommendation: make the chin turret standard equipment on all B-17 production immediately. The cable WWII lands on the desk of General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, who faces institutional revolt. Boeing's chief engineer, Claire Egtvet, argues strenuously against the modification. The B-17 design, he insists, represents years of refinement. Every pound has been justified, every system optimized. Adding 1,200 pounds of turret and ammunition forward of the center of gravity creates flight characteristic changes that haven't been properly tested. The modification emerged from a failed project, the YB-40, that proved the concept unworkable. Colonel Benjamin Kelsey, Chief of Air Force Fighter Development, also opposes standardization. The performance penalty, he calculates, means modified bombers will fly slower, climb slower, and burn more fuel. In a formation, the slowest bomber dictates group performance. Make chin turrets standard, Kelsey argues, and every bomber group's combat effectiveness decreases measurably. The weight penalty becomes the central argument. A fully loaded B-17F with maximum fuel, bomb load, and ammunition already operates near structural limits. Engineers specify maximum takeoff weight at 65,000 pounds. The chin turret modification pushes this to 66,200 pounds. That additional weight translates to reduced ceiling, increased takeoff distance, and decreased range. In wartime operations, Kelsey argues, these margins matter desperately. On December 8, 1943, Arnold convenes a meeting at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Present are Boeing representatives, Douglas engineers who installed the turrets, Bendix designers who built the turret system, and combat commanders fresh from England. The room represents the collision of engineering theory and combat reality. Boeing's presentation focuses on testing data. Wind tunnel analysis shows the chin turret increases drag coefficient by 3%. Performance calculations indicate a 400-foot reduction in service ceiling. Rate of climb decreases by 40 feet per minute. These margins, the Boeing engineer concludes, represent the difference between reaching bombing altitude before German fighters intercept and becoming targets ourselves. Then, Colonel Curtis LeMay stands. Fresh from commanding the 3rd Bombardment Division, LeMay brings unvarnished combat experience. "I've lost 60 crews in 3 months," he states flatly, 38 aircraft to frontal attacks. "I've watched German fighters approach nose-on while my bombardiers fired handheld weapons that might as well be pea shooters. The chin turret changes that equation completely." LeMay describes a mission from late October. 4 modified B-17Fs flew in his formation. German fighters approached head-on as usual, expecting easy kills. The chin turrets engaged at 600 yards. 2 FW-190s broke off, one trailing smoke. The psychological impact, LeMay explains, proved as important as the tactical result. German pilots, accustomed to uncontested frontal approaches, suddenly faced defensive fire from stable, aimed platforms. They hesitated, adjusted tactics, gave bomber formations precious seconds. "Your performance data," LeMay tells the Boeing engineer, "assumes we reach the target. My combat data shows we're being shot down before that happens. The chin turret means more bombers reach the target, and more bombers return home. I don't care if they climb slower. Dead bombers don't climb at all." The room erupts in argument. Boeing engineers demand formal testing procedures, safety analyses, structural certification. Douglas representatives defend their modification as combat-proven. Bendix designers propose improvements: reinforced mounting, improved blast deflectors, upgraded servo motors. Through the chaos, Arnold sits silent, reviewing casualty reports from Black Thursday. Finally, Arnold raises his hand. The room falls silent. "Gentlemen," he begins, "I'm authorizing chin turret installation as standard equipment on all B-17 production, effective immediately. Boeing, Douglas, and Vega will modify their production lines. All B-17s manufactured from this point forward will be designated B-17G and will include the Bendix chin turret as primary forward defense. This decision is final." Boeing's chief engineer opens his mouth to protest, but Arnold cuts him off. "Every day we delay this decision," Arnold states quietly. "I sign letters to mothers telling them their sons died in aircraft we knew were vulnerable. The modification happens now. And here, I want to ask you to do something. If you're finding value in these forgotten stories of engineering courage, hit that subscribe button. We're a small channel dedicated to bringing you history that deserves to be remembered. Your support means we can keep researching, keep documenting, keep honoring those who made impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. We rely on you, our audience, to keep these stories alive. Thank you." December 1943. The first production B-17Gs arrive in England carrying serial numbers beginning with Block 1. The aircraft represent a manufacturing miracle. Boeing, Douglas, and Vega have retooled production lines in 30 days to standardize the chin turret modification. Every B-17G rolling off assembly lines now carries the distinctive undernose bulge that marks it as a different beast from its predecessors. Combat crews receive intensive training on the turret system. Bombardiers discover the remote control system responds smoothly, requiring minimal adjustment during combat. The twin 50 caliber guns fire at 850 rounds per minute each, putting 1,700 rounds per minute downrange. At 600 yards, typical engagement range, the converging fire streams create a cone of destruction 12 feet wide. German fighters approaching head-on must fly through this cone or break off their attack. Initial combat testing occurs during missions to Bremen and Osnabrück in December. The 305th Bomb Group, which lost 13 of 16 aircraft to frontal attacks at Schweinfurt, flies with 6 B-17Gs in formation. German fighters approach using their proven frontal tactics. The Chin turrets engage at long range. Tracer rounds streak ahead of the formation, visible proof of defensive capability that hadn't existed weeks earlier. 4 Bf-109s break off their attack before firing their own weapons. One FW-190 presses the attack and takes direct hits from 3 turrets simultaneously, its wing folding as it tumbles past the formation. The psychological impact exceeds the tactical results. German fighter pilots, interviewed after the war, described the shock of facing nose-mounted turrets. "We had owned the frontal approach," Luftwaffe ace Heinz Knoke later recalled. "Suddenly, the Americans had teeth. The turret fire looked like lines of light reaching for us. Pilots who pressed attacks took horrible losses. We adjusted tactics, approached from different angles, but we never regained the advantage frontal attacks gave us in 1943. The combat data accumulates through January and February 1944. The 8th Air Force meticulously tracks loss rates, comparing B-17F groups against B-17G groups flying identical missions. The numbers tell an unambiguous story. B-17F formations suffer frontal attack losses at 7% per mission. B-17G formations experience 2% frontal attack losses under identical conditions. The Chin turret reduces frontal vulnerability by 70%. February 2025, 1944. The massive offensive called Big Week provides the definitive test. Over 3,000 sorties target German aircraft factories in the largest sustained bombing campaign of the war. The 8th Air Force dispatches primarily B-17Gs, now comprising 60% of bomber strength. Luftwaffe fighters throw everything they have at the formations. The resulting air battles involve over 1,000 aircraft in swirling dogfights across German skies. Lieutenant James Howard pilots B-17G Jersey Bounce Jr. during the February 20th mission to Leipzig. As his formation approaches the target, he counts 35 German fighters positioning for coordinated attacks. The lead elements strike from directly ahead. Howard, operating the Chin turret from his bombardier station, engages at 700 yards. His tracers intersect with a Bf-109's flight path. The German fighter's engine erupts in flames, and the aircraft rolls inverted, dropping away. "Before the turret," Howard later told debriefers, "I'd watch them come straight at us while I fired a handheld gun that bounced around in the slipstream. I'd fire 50 rounds and maybe 3 hit anywhere near the target. With the turret, I fire 50 rounds and 45 go exactly where I aim. That's not just firepower. That's confidence. The Germans see that confidence. They know we can hurt them now." The Big Week. Losses prove the modification's value beyond doubt. Of 105 B-17s lost during the 5-day campaign, only 14 fall to frontal attacks, 13% of losses compared to 60% during Black Thursday. The B-17G's Chin turret hasn't made the aircraft invulnerable, but it has eliminated the bomber's most critical vulnerability. Combat camera footage from Big Week captures the turret's effect. Film shows German fighters approaching formations, opening fire at extreme range, 800 to 1,000 yards, then breaking off immediately. Luftwaffe pilots, accustomed to pressing attacks to 300 yards for killing shots, now cannot afford the exposure. The chin turret forces them to fire at ranges where hitting the target requires luck rather than skill. Technical analysis reveals unexpected benefits. The chin turret's remotely controlled system proves more accurate than anticipated. Bombardiers, strapped into their seats with stable aiming platforms, achieve hit rates 5 times higher than gunners using flexible handheld weapons. The psychological burden shifts too. Bombardiers report feeling empowered rather than helpless during frontal attacks. Crew cohesion improves when every member contributes to defense. By March 1944, the 8th Air Force operates primarily B-17G bombers. Production reaches 120 aircraft per month across 3 manufacturing centers. The bomber's silhouette changes definitively. That undernose turret becomes the visual signature of American air power over Europe. German intelligence reports acknowledge the modification's impact. A captured Luftwaffe tactical manual from April 1944 instructs pilots: avoid frontal attacks against G-model fortresses. The nose armament presents unacceptable risk. Approach from sides or rear where defensive fire remains manageable. The modification's success generates cascading effects. With frontal attacks mitigated, German fighters must approach from angles where bomber defensive formations concentrate firepower. Loss rates continue declining. By summer 1944, bomber missions achieve survival rates above 95%, an inversion of the grim mathematics from Black Thursday. Crews completing 25 mission tours becomes routine rather than exceptional. In total, between December 1943 and May 1945, 8,872 B-17Gs are manufactured, more than any other B-17 variant. These aircraft fly 179,000 sorties over Europe, dropping 452,000 tons of bombs. The chin turret modification directly contributes to the survival of an estimated 360 bomber crews, 3,600 airmen, who would have otherwise fallen to frontal attacks. Thank you for watching this far. If these stories move you, please click the like button and share this video. These aren't just military statistics, they're fathers, brothers, sons, who came home because someone made the right call at the right time. Every share helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. Now let's finish this tale. May 8, 1945, VE Day. Across England, American bomber bases erupt in celebration. Air crews who survived the brutal mathematics of aerial warfare embrace, weep, and begin the surreal process of imagining life beyond missions. At hundreds of bases, B-17Gs sit silent on hard stands, their olive drab paint weathered, their engines cooling, their chin turrets pointed at peaceful skies. Lieutenant Robert Hughes, the pilot who survived Black Thursday, stands beside his bomber at Thorpe Abbotts. His crew has completed their tour. Against all odds, they're going home. Hughes runs his hand along the chin turret's armored housing and recalls that October day when he had only a handheld weapon against frontal attacks that killed the crew beside him. "We called it the lifesaver," Hughes told military historians in 1947. "That turret changed everything. Before the G model, you felt helpless when you saw fighters coming straight at you. After the turret, you had a fighting chance. The Germans knew it too. You could see them change tactics, come at us from different angles. That turret didn't just shoot down fighters, it made them hesitate. And hesitation in aerial combat means survival." General Karl Spaatz, who commanded the strategic air forces in Europe, wrote in his after-action report, "The B-17G modification proved decisive in sustaining the bomber offensive through winter 1943-1944, Without the Chin turret's forward defensive capability, loss rates would have forced strategic bombing suspension. The modification, initially controversial and unauthorized, ultimately saved the campaign. German accounts corroborate the turret's impact. Adolf Galland, who commanded Luftwaffe fighter forces, noted in his post-war memoir, "The Americans closed their defensive gap with typical efficiency. The nose turret installation eliminated the frontal approach advantage we exploited successfully in 1943. We adapted tactics, but never regained the initiative we possessed before G-model deployment." The engineers who initiated the unauthorized modification remain largely anonymous. Douglas Aircraft's Tulsa facility received a commendation for production excellence, but individual names rarely appear in documentation. The modification happened through collective judgment rather than singular genius, engineers recognizing combat need and acting decisively without bureaucratic permission. Of the 8,172 B-17Gs manufactured, only a handful survive today. Museums worldwide display these aircraft as monuments to the men who flew them. Visitors invariably notice the chin turret, that distinctive bulge beneath the plexiglass nose. Tour guides explain its purpose, its impact, its legacy. But the full story, the unauthorized installation, the bureaucratic battle, the combat, validation, remains largely untold. Modern military aircraft carry the chin turret's descendant. The B-52 Stratofortress, B-1B Lancer, and countless other bombers mount defensive systems in their noses, descendants of that rushed 1943 modification. Military doctrine now mandates all aspect defense, no vulnerable angles, no undefended approaches. The lesson learned at terrible cost over Germany in 1943 echoes through every defensive system designed since. As for those 360 crews, 3,600 men, who survived because of the chin turret's presence, most never knew how close the modification came to cancellation. They returned home, raised families, built careers, and grew old without ever learning their survival depended on engineers making unauthorized installations and a general overruling institutional resistance. In 1987, the B-17 Crew Survivors Association erected a memorial at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. The memorial bears a single phrase carved in granite: "Because of you, we came home." The words apply to many heroes of that war, but perhaps none more directly than to the anonymous engineers who bolted twin 50 caliber guns beneath a bomber's nose and changed the course of the air war. The B-17G chin turret modification teaches an enduring lesson. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat, between survival and catastrophe, comes down to a few individuals recognizing urgent need and acting decisively despite institutional inertia. The modification looked suicidal on paper, adding weight to overloaded bombers facing determined opposition. In practice, it proved salvation. 3,600 men came home who otherwise wouldn't have. That's not just engineering success. That's 3,600 futures, 3,600 families, 3,600 lives that continued because someone refused to accept that defense came with unacceptable cost. The suicidal modification wasn't suicidal at all. It was survival itself, packaged in 1,200 pounds of aluminum, steel, and inspired improvisation.